can I ask you, Wick, how do you know that?
I was going to say the same thing. It's odd that I'm aligning with Dylan on this one, but that's insanity.
He's disagreeing with me on if it had an effect.
No. He's disagreeing on materially what you said. To bring it to the question that Gibbs asked, it seemed that Wick was sort of saying that Trump's foreign policy is sort of ham-fisted, or, I think you're oversimplifying and incorrect. But to ask the question directly to you, Wick, then, given your answer there, a twofold question to you. One, can you imagine anyone else in the world right now, any world leader, that would be in a better position to try to negotiate a peaceful deal other than Putin and Zelensky themselves?
No, I think
Trump?
The U.S. absolutely is kind of the only power right now that could facilitate a deal if one is to be made. Can it facilitate a deal is the question. And I honestly don't think Putin wants peace. And I think that's something that, at the end of the day, if Putin doesn't want to stop the war, he's not going to stop the war. There's really not much we could do aside from simply arming Ukraine and even going further into supporting Ukraine than we have that we could do. However, I don't see Trump doing that. I just don't see Trump going that route.
I'm certainly happy to talk about whether or not negotiations can be successful and which sides to blame and all of that. That's fine. But the other question I want to ask you, just as a quick follow-up, do you think that Biden or Kamala Harris would have been in a better position to negotiate a peace deal than Donald Trump?
I think Kamala would have done a better job. Biden might have done a better job. I'm less certain on that one, but I think Kamala would have been a better person to facilitate.
What did either of them do in their administration?
Hold on. They obviously made sure that Russia knew what side that the U.S. was actually on, and they continued to actually arm Ukraine, actually fund Ukraine, actually support Ukraine. Not as much as they should have.
Right. They kept the war going. We're asking who would be best to have it.
Here's the thing. If Putin does not want peace, well, let me just ask. Just assume I'm correct here, that Putin just does not want peace. So all these peace talks, it's not going to work, right? How do we get peace other than that? Stopping Putin.
If you start under the assumption that nothing in the world will stop Vladimir Putin, then yes, you could say that no one would have been successful. However, that would contradict your claim that Kamala would have been more successful.
No,
because clearly, if we accept your own hypothetical,
you're phrasing this incorrectly, right? There is a way to stop Putin. You make it much more expensive than it has been to continue to prosecute the war. This is how all smaller countries have always beaten bigger countries. They make it
not true.
Insanely costly in order to continue to prosecute the war until they give up and go home.
When the Biden administration was in power, they told Ukraine that they weren't allowed to use certain missiles, drones, and whatnot for deep attacks into Russia.
Yeah, that was a mistake.
That didn't end until the Trump administration's transition team requested it end after the election was already over, allowing Ukraine to engage in these giant drone attacks we've been seeing, where they're actually costing the Russian economy, they're actually costing the Russian military massive amounts of money. I thought they took out like a large amount of their large bombers a couple of months back. They've just been
certainly that operation was in planning for years.
So just the dynamic of costing them money, though, wouldn't that restriction being removed by the Trump transition team and the Trump government endorsing it, while the Biden administration was saying don't take offensive measures too deep into Russia, wouldn't that alone be the cost-benefit analysis you want?
So if that's in isolation, this is the problem. Like in isolation, if what you're saying is true, then yes, I think that was a good move. However, Trump has also signaled to Putin again and again and again that he's willing to stop supporting Ukraine. Do you know why a lot of the recent gains Russia has been able to make is because the U.S. stopped sharing our intel under Trump? They're like, we're just going to stop sharing our intel with you to Ukraine. We're just not going to share our intel. And that has allowed Putin to gain much more territory than he otherwise would have. And so, like this talking out of your both sides of your mouth that Trump does with this, like, yeah, you can strike deeper to Ukraine, but also we're going to turn off all intelligence sharing with you for a while. And
okay, so I answered your hypothetical. I'm sorry,
go ahead, Dylan, please.
But I would like to ask hypothetical.
Can I ask you, Wick, how do you know that? Because from my conversations with soldiers, it is true that probably the intelligence cut had an effect in the Kursk area for a very short period of time, but this intelligence cut was very brief. So like all of the recent gains are probably not due to a lack of intelligence sharing.
I was going to say the same thing. It's odd that I'm aligning with Dylan on this one, but that's insanity, frankly.
You don't. So
that
you don't
you're
think that they
talking about.
cut off?
There's
Wait,
no proof it actually even
Wait,
affected the Kursk gains, but
Well, it's insanity to think that
I'm just
Ukraine
talking
doesn't
about what
have
I've
their own
said, what I've heard.
intelligence.
no, I agree with you actually. on
No,
this.
Ukraine
know.
has its own intelligence, but a lot of its munitions, its weapons and stuff relied on our satellites, our intelligence sharing, our kind of giving them like targeting info.
Which
things
Yeah,
like
no,
that.
but this is true, Wick. But this is specifically true for the Kursk incursion in a short period where we cut off intelligence sharing, and there was concern about how that affected our use of those weapons in that specific area. And whether or not that's true, the Russians believed it could be true, and so they engaged in an offensive operation, trying to exploit what they thought was an intelligence window. And ultimately, that did lead to the withdrawal of Ukrainian forces. You could paint a picture that might, maybe after the war is over, once signal intelligence has been revealed, could say that it had an impact. But outside of that specific time window, I don't think the intelligence cuts are having an impact on the front line.
I disagree. I think that obviously.
Well,
when
okay,
you cut off
how much is a
intelligence-
massive amount of ground lost? Can you define that for me?
No.
Okay, even more important question.
Like,
before I
how
get
much
to my
is
Dylan
a matter
hypothetical.
agreeing on
now?
something. It's probably the
please.
case. Okay.
If
Like miles?
Now listen, let me be
21
clear.
miles?
Please, let me be clear here. Like I think that I am woefully ignorant of the actual situation on the ground in Ukraine because so much propaganda comes out of both sides. But I do try to read information on all sides of the ledger. Dylan, to his credit, is on the ground and talking to people who are literally fighting. He's telling you what he's heard from them. You're like, I disagree. Great. Your source is?
My sources, people in. Let me get some reports out for you. I'll get the sources.
Like
don't worry.
I can just say, like, I did like a short doc on the border about the Kursk incursion.
But you agree
and,
with me
like,
that they did cut off intelligence, at least for a time.
Well, yeah, they cut off intelligence. The question is whether it had an impact. But if it did have an impact, it was only probably in Kursk. If it
But
had
Rob,
any impact at all.
So to be clear, Rob,
Just none
he's
of the
not
recent
disagreeing
gains.
with me on the fact
Yes.
of the matter. He's disagreeing with me on if it had an effect.
No. He's disagreeing on materially what you said when you said if you see the recent gains that Russia has made, and Dylan's saying no, there's only a chance that that affected a small window. He's saying we don't know how much that intelligence was shut off. Now we can say that Russia probably believed it and it probably caused them to aggress, but he's saying we don't know exactly how much that loss of intelligence is to blame for
Okay,
that.
I can't give you an exact number of how much ground was lost because of this, but I can
Dylan's
tell
right
you
on this.
pretty with a large and a high degree of confidence that when you cut off intelligence sharing, that it causes you to be less effective a less effective fighting force, which will allow a better fighting force to beat you.
Well,
right?
I'm not denying that, Wick, but we're talking
Yes.
about a time span of about 1 week where this occurred, and I'm sure it had an effect. I talked to soldiers who told me how it affected them, and I feel bad about what happened, but that was a week. And, it's been months and months since then, and recent advances on either the Pokrovsk sector or the Konstantinivka sector, and I filmed all of these sectors in the last 2 months. I've talked to the soldiers about why they're losing land. None of them tell me it has to do with a lack of intelligence. It might have to do with they want more drones in the sky to gather intelligence, but nothing when it comes to a lack of intelligence sharing from the United States government. There's
But
always
even
the
losing
threat of it
Kursk,
being
is
cut off
that not
again, but
is that not enough to say that was a pretty crippling blow to Ukraine?
if that had the impact that it could have had, which we don't know, then maybe. But I still think it would have been one of many contributing factors that would have pushed them out of Kursk. There was many other problems they had.
I'm not suggesting that this is the only reason that Russia has made gains in the past, but I am saying
at
it's
least take
contributing
back
factor.
will you take back your statement that when you said the recent gains that we've seen of Russia, that so far you provided
Sure,
no
I'll restrict
evidence?
it to Kursk.
Okay, fair enough. I wanted to ask you a hypothetical. You asked me this hypothetical in the world.
After
of
that,
if-
by the way, Rob, after that, could I answer your question?
Yes. You asked me this hypothetical about what if we knew that Putin would never accept any peaceful resolution, that he'd never stop. Let's do with my hypothetical. Let's say that Putin actually does want a resolution. There's just things that he wants to see negotiated, like guarantees that they get to keep some of the land or guarantees that Ukraine won't join NATO, etc. So hypothetically, you have to agree now that Putin does want that. Who would be more likely to bring a peaceful resolution? The guy who's sitting down with Putin and trying to bring him in and facilitate facilitate a meeting between Putin and Zelensky, or the people that you advocated for that said, no, we're not going to sit down in the room with Putin, such as Kamala and Biden?
Obviously, the one who is willing to sit down in the room.
Thanks.
The question becomes, are the things that Putin is requiring in order to get peace in this hypothetical something that A, the Ukrainians are willing to accept? Because if they're not willing to accept it, it doesn't matter for the same reason. And B, are they something that would result in actual lasting peace? Or would they simply be like a Treaty of Versailles type of situation that's going to lead to just more conflict in the future?
I would be happy to address this later, but I definitely want to leave Dylan get a shot in there. Suffice it to say, though, at least when it comes to a potential peaceful resolution, you're saying there is no potential because Putin will say no, therefore we'll go with the people that didn't even attempt. I'm saying, in answer to Gibbs' question, Trump is best positioned because at least he's willing to take the meeting, which would be the only chance of a peaceful resolution.
Let's go to Dylan, then I want to ask a question after that. Go ahead.
Sure, I want to make sure that we get to like the stuff on the table so we can actually talk to substantive like
that's
about
where
the
we're going
Donbass
next,
and stuff like that. But
yeah.
As for like the hypothetical, of course, we're just playing games here. We're just playing partisan games. We're taking who would have done better. I don't know for sure because Harris is completely untested when it comes to this type of high-profile diplomacy, and people like me were making the bet that the people around her, like Dr. Philip Gordon, who was her national security advisor as vice president, and was going to become her national security advisor if she became president, would have had enough knowledge, having worked in the region before, that they could have guided her towards a policy that would have been able to keep pressure on the Russians until they'd be able to make a deal that would have been more agreeable to both European and American security interests. And whether or not you think that that would have taken 1 year, 2 years, 3 years to keep on that pressure until the Russians would be more willing to negotiate under terms, like, for example, at least a frozen front line instead of giving us stuff that we haven't even taken yet. I don't know how long that would have taken, but what I do know is that her threats would have been taken more seriously. One of the problems I have with Trump diplomacy is that he's a big talker. And sometimes that's good when he needs to get a message out there, but sometimes that's bad when he just doesn't know to stop talking when he's ahead. And so he'll go out there and he'll say he'll do things, and then he doesn't do those things, and then that degrades his credibility. When we go from a 24-hour peace deal to a 100-day peace deal to 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, and we keep kicking this can down the road, and we threaten to do this, and you have to give us an unconditional ceasefire right now, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then none of those things are delivered upon, eventually the reputation that is builds, and I read the Russian papers, of course they have to be translated first, but I read the Russian papers and they say that, look, Putin, Trump says a lot, he's a big talker, but you always have to wait till he actually does something. And so far, he hasn't really done much of anything when it comes to deliveries on either big weapons or the big 500% sanctions that he talked about on the campaign trail that then he is fighting with Lindsey Graham on, watering them down. So it seems to be that message stays inconsistent. He doesn't deliver on his threats, and he's making some of the worst mistakes that Obama did of red lines that you don't deliver on, and it makes it much harder to get an end goal. Maybe Harris would have been a lot more prickly and would have not had the meeting in Alaska. Okay, maybe it would have been in Oman or a more traditional location if they did have the meeting. But I do think that when she says, I'm going to tariff you at this rate, that the Russians would believe it.
I don't know. There's unpredictability with Trump, as I said earlier. I'll just say this real quick. He bombed Iran. People said, oh, the same dude, that would be a red line they didn't cross. They crossed that red line and he bombed them. But I think that what we're talking about here, Dylan, is with Kamala, it may have taken longer, but put Ukraine in a better negotiating position. I'm saying who had the best chance to get a ceasefire or a potential peace deal in the short term, and I think that's Trump. The difference is,
but Trump.
We know Trump hasn't.
Real quick,
right? Trump has not done that.
But he has a better possibility than Kamala did, and certainly better than Biden did while Kamala was his VP, which didn't. But I just want to say this: the difference would be the terms of that potential deal probably will be less favorable than what either of you two would like for the perspective of Ukraine. But that's what happens when you're negotiating from the position of the loser, of the side that's losing. You're going to negotiate from the position of weakness.